Tell you that I was very pleasantly surprised by the response of the people who had listened to the message last Wednesday. It was probably one of the most downloaded, some of you don't know, but if you do know, one of the most downloaded and quickly downloaded. I was getting Facebook messages and things like that from other states, and people were just looking us up on Facebook. They were thanking us for the message about emotional boundaries and how important it is for us to protect our emotional boundaries so that we can enjoy the life that God has given to us, but then also help others to enjoy it, also show others how to love us the way that we need and we want to be loved. Now, in Romans chapter 12, verse 18, it says, if it's possible, as much as depends on you. That means there's a responsibility that's on us. We have a responsibility in the relationships, but that doesn't mean that it's always going to be possible. Because, like I said last week, if it is possible, as much as depends on you, also on me, we're to live peaceably. But not everybody's going to live peaceably with us. We know that from Scripture. To kick the dust off of our feet and continue moving forward. You know, it also said, this is Jesus' statements. He said, don't cast your pearls before the swine. Don't give everything that, sometimes there's things that are inside of us or treasures that are inside of us that we ought not to offer to somebody because they may not value it the way that God wants and intends for it to be valued. You know, how do you set an emotional boundary with somebody? Some people don't even know. You know, we get engulfed and engrossed with the craziness that's going on in the world. Some people who have a hard time setting boundaries, the word no is almost like a confrontation or a bad word when we say no to a person. But we're going to discuss that. We're going to unpack that in Scripture today. As we discussed last week with Galatians chapter 6, verse 2. It says, we're to bear one another's burdens, but then it also says, let your brother bear his burden. If you remember, last week we were discussing the crushing burden, which is baros, where we're called to help somebody with it. But then also there's a fortion, which is a burden or a load that we're to help or to allow somebody else to carry. So there's one where we are called to help a person through difficulties and through crises. But then there's also a burden that we're to allow another person. You know, when I was a teacher in New York, I remember many times going to the parents. I was like, you're not really helping your child if you're doing the homework. I mean, you already know this stuff, so why are you doing the child's homework? Sometimes I'd get this report, I'd be like, wow, this report is amazing. There's not a typo, every bit of grammar is, and then I would find out, you know what, the parent did it. They wanted the child to do well, but when it came time for the test, the child was unprepared. And that's the way sometimes our relationships can be because we want to help a person so much. Have you ever been there? I know I have. I've wanted to help somebody so badly. I wanted to see them grow and prosper in life so much so that I was paying all the consequences for what they were doing. I was the one who was sowing so much into their life. And they weren't really prepared. There's a burden that we're to allow a person to carry so that they can grow stronger into the destiny and the identity that God has for them. So how do we set these boundaries? First thing I always encourage people, again, is know what you want. If you don't know what you want, then you can't communicate to somebody else what it is that you want. So these are some questions, and I want to go over the tail end of last week's message again so that it is fresh in our mind. But it says, what would you do if you would be successful in it and you weren't afraid? To make it real simple is, what would you do if you weren't afraid? If there was no fear, what is it that you would want or desire? Because what holds us back sometimes is the self-imposed limitation. If I say to this person that I don't really want to do this, or if there's something that I want in this relationship, then they might reject me, or they might not like it, or there might be a consequence or a conflict, so we can avoid it. These are some other questions. What can you live without? What is it that you don't want in your life? I know for some of you, you probably don't want more drama. I know I don't. I don't want drama, I don't want problems. But you know what? I'm willing to enter in because of love. What can't you live with? Also, listen to your feelings. Now, sometimes people don't listen to their feelings. Now, in listening to our feelings, we're not to be mastered by our feelings. Because as a Christian, we're to listen to our feelings but not be led by our feelings. Our feelings are going to be an indicator of what's going on inside of us. You know, if you get a check in your spirit and there's some kind of feelings and emotions that are rising up and maybe some alarms or little bells going off in a relationship with a person, guess what? Listen to your feelings. Listen to them and bring them before the Lord. question it. Bring it. Is it a fear from a past hurt that I need to, not to deal with before God? Or is this God giving me a warning? You know what? I've been down this road before. Let me not go down this road. Well, sometimes our feelings are a good indicator of what's going on inside of us, and our soul will tell us. We're not to be led by our feelings, but we are certainly to listen to them. Now, here's another one. Say what you want and not what you don't want. I listen to some people, and in the conversations, they can tell everybody what they don't want. But what is it that you want? Now, this is something that I actually asked in a conversation just this week of a couple people. If I was going to ask you to marry me, no. Or if somebody was going to ask you to marry you, whether it's a man or a woman, or it's your significant other, or your wife or your husband, if they were going to ask you to marry you, would you like them to say, well, I feel led to marry you? That's a good Christianese. Would you want somebody to go to you and say, you know what, I feel led to marry you? Would you want them to say that to you? No, I don't think we wouldn't want that. Would you want them to say, I'll marry you if you want to get married? No, that's putting the decision upon them. Or do you want to maybe say to them, do you want to get married? That's okay, that's a little bit better. But how about this one? I want to marry you. So you're giving direction. You're sharing what you want. Now, people around us in a loving relationship are going to naturally want to respond to what we desire. That's a healthy relationship. It's not always you giving, and it's not always us taking either. There's supposed to be a mutual give and take in a relationship. Now, we also ought not to bear false responsibility upon ourselves. Very often, that's what we do. We bear, because we're told, and I shared with you my experience. In John chapter 15, verse 13, it says that greater love has no man than to lay down his life for his brother. And I thought, I'm supposed to die for everybody. I'm never supposed to have any rest or peace or joy. Every moment of my day I thought was to serve people. And then I saw in the scriptures that Jesus even jumped into a boat sometimes, and then he went out into the water because he was to have some rest and some time with God the Father. God wants you to enjoy your life, brother. There's some people in this sanctuary that I want to tell you that you've done enough. You've done enough for the people that are around you. You don't need to let some other people continue. It's okay, let them serve you. Sometimes it's pride, pride, where we can sow to other people, but we won't allow other people to sow into us because we get so used to giving out. So again, we don't want to bear false responsibility. And there's some people, and this is a good indicator. If something spills on the table and you didn't spill it, do you feel yourself sometimes wanting to say, I'm sorry? Because there's some people that want to apologize for everything that goes on around them. If something happens, they feel in some way that they're responsible for it. That's a sign that we're bearing false responsibility. Some of us, again, if we have been brought up in a conditionally loving environment, we can have broken wing syndrome, that we feel like we're always to take care of somebody, and that would be our identity. I want to ask you guys, as we delve into these emotional boundaries, to stay out of the blast radius of the crazy makers. Now, there's some people in life that they are not going to want to deal with their issue. They're not going to want to deal with their difficulties. I see it all the time in codependence, and a mom who wants her son to stop drinking and doing drugs, but allows him to live in the house when he continues to live that lifestyle. Oh, I don't want him to get hurt, is what they say. They're making an excuse for the behavior. Instead, what they should say is stay out of the blast radius. Allow that person, if they're at that age, to make this age-appropriate decision. Because the truth is that we can't save anybody anyway. So we allow that person to suffer some of the consequences. That's the way that God teaches us very often. He allows us to bear the responsibility for our consequences. I remember one time when I was younger, and it's not wrong for you to always shield people. I mean, it's wrong for you to always shield people from the consequences. When I was younger, I remember a time where I was getting a little bit older, and my mom said to me, make sure you bring your coat with you. And she told me all the time. And then finally I went out with my dad one day, and it was cold, and guess what I didn't do? I didn't bring my jacket. I said, Dad, I didn't bring my jacket. Mom always brings me home to go get my jacket when I go out and I forget it. He says, well, son, I got a lot of things to do, so you're going to just have to tough it out. And I toughed it out, and I was cold. It wasn't like I was going to freeze to death, but I was cold in some of the stores that I went to. Now, some people would say, you know what, that's cruel, that's mean. But no, I was growing up, and I was a young man, and he taught me a responsibility that day. You know what I never did? Never forgot my jacket after that. That was a lesson that was learned. And there's some people, even today, that would say that that's mean. But I don't believe that's mean. That was him allowing me and teaching me to be a responsible young man. I wasn't 5 years old when it happened. I don't want to tell you how old I was when it happened. Now, in the Crazy Makers, this is what I thought was interesting. Whenever a bomb goes off, there's the fireball area, then there's the air blast. And then there's also, after that, if it's a nuke, there's another ring that's called radiation. Now, the way I kind of liken it to is that people we all have them. Let's be for real. There's people that are just, you look at them and you can just identify, man, they create drama wherever they are. Well, there's that fireball radius. I don't want to be in the fireball radius because that's the center of the explosion. Then there's the air blast area, and that's where you kind of feel some of the consequences of it. Then outside on that other ring is radiation. Now this is where the way I see ministry, because I want to help everybody. I mean, that's just my heart. But sometimes the way that we help somebody is allowing them to feel some of the consequences of their actions. Oh, if they didn't pay a bill, well, I'm sure I would love to, if this family members, I'll help them. But if I help them every month, guess what? I took on their burden. I took on their responsibility. Now their irresponsibility may become my responsibility. Yesterday's blessing becomes tomorrow's or today's expectation. Have you ever been there? Have you ever been there with somebody where, you know what, oh, I'm so happy, I'm so grateful, thank you. But then it's almost like this is what happens as the generations or as time goes on with that blessing turning into an expectation. What do you mean you're not going to pay my bill? Have you ever been there? I know I have. Somebody said to me, what do you mean you're not going to do that for me? You're not going to give me a ride at 12 o'clock at night. I remember there was a man that I was ministering to, and he needed help, and I wanted to help him. And I was listening. But the times that he would call me got later and later. He called me at 4 o'clock in the morning one time, true occurrence. Got up out of my bed, and he said to me, I need to talk to somebody. I said, okay, I'm your guy. I'm a good servant of the Lord. I left at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I went and talked to him. He was intoxicated. And he said to me, you know what, I didn't really have an emergency. I just wanted somebody to talk to. I said, what? Are you serious? He was serious. And then I got up and I left. And you know what happened? He got offended. He got offended at me because I wasn't there to enable him in his behavior. Now you have to determine how far you're willing to go, because we all have our boundaries, our emotional boundaries, and we should listen to them. Now in communicating with other people, there are some things that I call tells. You know, before I was saved, I used to play cards. Now when somebody had a really good hand, some of you, has anyone played cards here before? Come on, okay, raise your hand if you've played cards before. Or raise your hand if you've played a game before. Okay. Raise your hand if you're in a relationship with anybody, okay. All right. If somebody has a good hand, you ever see that? Tell. They told you what's going on inside of them. Most communication is nonverbal. That means it's your body language that's going to speak to the people that are around you. So I've learned to listen to or watch for tells. In this sanctuary one time, there was a lady that needed a ride after service. And she was sitting in that seat over there, and I was speaking to somebody. I told her I was going to help her to get a ride because her ride didn't. So she was waiting for me. But I forgot because I was talking to a bunch of different people. But then I saw her leg, and it started shaking a little bit like this. And then it started shaking like this. How many of you know that was a sign that she was getting upset because she felt like I wasn't caring about what was going on with her? That was a tell. So in relationships, we learn to look for the tells or the behaviors inside of our people that are close to us to give us an indication what's going on with them. Now, if I'm setting a boundary, this is the second rule that I have, is count the cost. If you're setting a boundary with somebody, now there's some people that mistakenly think that if you tell a person that you don't like something, that everybody is immediately going to respond to that. Have you ever told somebody that you didn't like something? Maybe it's, I don't really like if you leave me waiting or you're late for 15 minutes or 30 minutes. I don't like when somebody leaves me for an appointment. Now, not all the time is somebody going to immediately respond. And statistically, this is the truth. It takes 5 to 7 times of setting a boundary for it to actually be established. So it's not the first time that you say it. Now, sometimes people get upset. Oh, well, you know what? I don't really like when you leave me at the place waiting there for half an hour. Could you please be on time? Now, it's not going to usually happen or be established the first time. It's not going to happen a second time. It takes 5 to 7 times to usually establish a boundary with somebody. So that's important for us to know. Now, I also give people the benefit of the doubt, and you should too. Sometimes people need time to establish these new habit patterns in their lives. I know that I have. There's a friend that I have that he doesn't like being called by his last name. But I grew up, I called everybody by their last name. John knows who it is. I still, by accident, sometimes call him by his last name. It's been years. I work very hard at it, but every now and then it slips out. So he forgives me, and we move on. And I try to do a little bit better. But that's establishing a boundary with somebody. So there is give and take. There is forgiveness. Now, boundaries are not a weapon to get what we want from people. It's kind of like a little bit of an indicator, or help somebody to see what we need and what we need for our own protection, but also how we want to be loved. Now, if somebody is also, here's another example. There was a lady that, let's call her name Edith. Now, Edith didn't like being called by this certain name. Some women in America, she came from another country, so some women in America, they kind of joke around with them. Hey, they would joke around, and they would call her this name, and she didn't really like this name. So she asked for them to stop, but they thought she was joking, so they continued to call her the name. It wasn't a terrible name. It was actually kind of a name that you would say to your friend, but it was like a pet name, but she didn't appreciate it. She didn't like it. She was from another culture, so she asked them to stop. But she got upset because she said it one time, and then she said it 2 times. And here's another thing that set her up for failure, is that she waited too long before she actually told them. It became a habit. And that's what can happen for us, that's what can happen to us when we don't establish emotional boundaries with people right away. If somebody does something that you don't like, don't dismiss it 5 to 7 times and then speak to them after those 5 to 7 times, allowing it to become a habit, and then finally say something. Because what would happen if you waited 7 times and then you said something, and then the boundary took another 5 to 7 times? That person has done it 14 times, and you could be boiling inside. You could be upset thinking that they don't care, but really they do. So I try to say to people, or let them know, and if something bothers me, I'm not going to dismiss it. Now, here are some things that we do to ourselves when we are in a relationship. We can minimize our own feelings. We can say I really shouldn't make a big deal out of it. Well, you don't have to make a big deal about it, but you can mention it to somebody, and you can share it with them so that they can work on that area, and they can develop it. Now, this is something also, and this is another step for us, is inventory your relationships. Inventory your relationships. When somebody is rubbing me the wrong way, and it takes a lot to rub me the wrong way, really. I'm not a person that gets offended by it. People have done some crazy stuff to me over the years, and people wonder, they're like, why aren't you upset with that? Because it takes a lot to offend me. I've pretty much had just about everything happen to me, so it really doesn't shock me or amaze me anymore when things happen. They say jokingly that to be a pastor, you have to have a heart as big as the room, but also a hide as thick as a rhinoceros. And there's a little bit of truth to that. But now, when somebody does rub me the wrong way, what I usually call them is a grace grower. They help me to grow in extending grace and mercy towards them. And that's what God wants me to do. He wants me to extend grace and mercy towards them. He wants me to understand. He wants me, as the old saying goes, to put myself in their shoes before I put them in their place. Have you ever done that? I know I have. You think that you know what a person is thinking, and you go and you say something to them. When I was younger, I went to somebody and I shared something with them, and I said, I was upset. I waited too long. I was already bothered. So I waited too long, and then I went to the person and I shared with them, and I spoke to them. And I got upset. I'm being honest. I was upset. In my own mind, I thought I had it figured out. But then I learned to put myself into somebody else's shoes to try and understand what they're going through. when they explain. Here's a good story about a man that kind of went through what I had gone through. There was a man that was sitting on a New York City train, and it was going by during rush hour. And this man had 3 children, and the 3 children were running all over the train. They were just like knocking over, they were jumping around, jumping onto the seats. There was a man that was just trying to read, and he was thinking to himself, you know what, why doesn't this guy just tell his kids to sit down? He's just sitting there with his head in his hands, just kind of like minding his own business, oblivious to what's going on around him. The kids are running amok on the train. Oh, the guy started to boil. And then he says, he finally got up the courage. He says, you know what, I'm going to go say something to this man. He walks over to the man. He says, you know what, why don't you tell your children to sit down? He says, they're causing chaos all over the train. The man looks up at him. He says, I don't know. He said, I don't even know what to do. He said, we're coming from my wife's funeral. The kids are all there. They don't even know what to do. They don't know how to handle it. I don't know how to handle it. The guy immediately put his head down, and he walked over to the side. Sometimes we don't know what other people are going through. So before we put somebody in their place, let's try to understand what they're going through. That man, when he was walking over to him on the train, he thought that the father wasn't concerned about what the children were doing, but he was. He just couldn't handle it. He wasn't emotionally able to because of life's circumstance. He was going through a Barrows moment in his life instead of a Fortion moment. Now, how does the grace grower, these are some questions for you, and I'll read them off to you. How does the grace grower react to your reactions? How do you react to the grace grower in your life? Sometimes God wants to change our reaction towards the person that is rubbing us the wrong way. Sometimes he wants us to humble ourselves a little bit more. Sometimes he wants us to be a little bit more patient. Maybe he wants us to be a little bit more encouraging to the person, or see where they're coming from a little bit more. This is a question that sometimes we have to be honest with ourselves and ask as well. Are we the grace grower driving others to reactive behavior? We could be. I mean, have you ever been a grace grower? Have you ever rubbed somebody the wrong way? Have you ever done something that... I know I have. As much as I try not to, I'm sure that I've rubbed people the wrong way at times. I'm probably my wife. The next one is how do others react to your actions and responses? Now, these are some examples that I wrote down. These are some thoughts that I deal with people in counseling very often. My grace grower's terrible childhood is why she reacts so irrationally. Sometimes people have gone through terrible circumstances and been through terrible things in their lives, but that does not give you a get-out-of-jail-free card or freedom from the consequences of your behavior. I remember a man, and I actually told him this. So I am loving, I am caring, I am compassionate. But through a long time of counseling with this man and helping to walk through the consequences of his actions, he said, you know what, my dad upset me, and I feel rejected and abandoned by my father and what he had done when he was younger. Walked the journey with him for a number of years, and then finally got to the point where I sat down with the guy. I said, listen, you're 45 years old. Nobody cares that daddy wasn't there. You have to accept the responsibility for your actions from this point forward and move. You can't allow that to become an excuse for the rest of your life, because you can limit what God wants to do. Now, that's some tough words. Those are some tough words. I wouldn't just share that with somebody blatantly, but the person knew that I loved them because I bore the consequences with them time and time again. So as I shared that became revelation to them. And you know what? They changed their life. They changed. They finally saw that the paradigm had been shattered. There was no more excuses for his behavior. Just like I said last week, we have to never make an excuse for our behavior, because what somebody else does to us does not determine what we are to do at that point. We're always responsible for our response and our reaction. My grace grower needs me to make him happy. Here's a statement that I say to myself. Happiness is an inside job. That means that I determine my happiness in the day. It's my attitude, not what happens to me, but what happens inside of me. Now, that for people that have mixed up boundaries and for that are bearing a lot of false responsibilities, this can be a tough message. This can straighten out a lot of the plumb lines that we have, but this is the truth. And if you want to enjoy your relationships, and if you want other people to enjoy you well, then we have to be free to be ourselves. We have to free to enjoy the life that God has given to us. My grace grower can't make it without me. Sometimes that's what people say to themselves. That is a responsibility that is being put upon you. And that's codependency. Next one is this. It is the wrong I do that causes my grace grower to be so crazy. There are some people that have said this to me. Now, I know these are extreme situations. I know that some of them are. Or maybe they're not. But in this situation, the woman came to me and she said, my husband is abusive towards me, but it's because I do this and I do this and I do that. What she was doing is saying that she was the cause of his bad behavior. Here's an honest story. When I was younger, I went out and I saw a man being abusive to a woman in the parking lot. I walked up to the woman and to the man and I said, hey, listen, get your hands off the girl. And you know what happened? The girl came around from the guy and she said, you get out of here. You mind your own business. And she yelled at me. And you know what I did? I walked away. Because there was such an entanglement of codependency there. I wasn't going to be able to straighten that out in just one conversation. See, we can only help as much as a person is willing to be helped. Here's another one. I couldn't survive without my grace grower. Sometimes people feel like they need the person that is causing them the grief in their life. Another one. If I just try hard enough. Have you ever felt like that? Some of you have been there. It's more that you do. If you do more, then that person is going to respond to you lovingly. Sometimes it's not the case. The more that you do, sometimes more people will take advantage of you. It's not always up to you. Those relationships are supposed to be a mutual give and take. Now, why do I say all of these things? Because if we look at the truth of what's been said over the messages in the past of this, your life is going to be today the same, and so is tomorrow, except for two things. Jerry said it just recently. Your 5 closest relationships. Your relationships are going to affect your destiny. Also, the books and the information and the knowledge that we take in. Now, the best relationship that we can have, obviously, is our relationship with God. But then after that is our relationships. One of the decisions that is going to affect your life the most is who you marry. Or if you're married, that closest relationship that you have. That's the relationship that we should be sowing the most into. Now, these are some statements, and these are truths. If you live with encouragement, you'll learn to be confident. If you learn to live with recognition, you'll reach towards your goals. If you learn to live with generosity, you learn to share. Isn't that true? Somebody learns to live with a person that's generous, then they learn to share. If you learn to live with encouragement, again, we said you get confidence. If you learn to live with approval, you learn to affirm others. If you live with honesty and fairness, you know what truth and justice are. If you live with security, you have faith in yourself and in those around you. If you live with friendliness, you learn that the world is a nice place in which to live. If, on the other hand, these are some things that I wrote down as well. If, on the other hand, you live with disapproval, ridicule, criticism, rejection, put-downs, selfishness, lies, cruelty, and harshness, you'll withdraw into fears, seeking approval from others, people-pleasing. That's what happens to many people that grow up in conditionally loving environments when they're growing up. What I mean by that is, and I grew up like that. My dad, if I did well, he would once in a while praise me. I came home, I remember the day where I started to become a little bit like this, and I had to be delivered of it. I came home with my report card. I said, man, my dad is finally going to be happy with me. I got A's in like everything, and I got a B in behavior. And he said to me, you know what, you did good on your studies, but you should have done better on your behavior. I said to myself, nothing is ever going to please this person. I said to myself, and I started to, it felt like my performance was necessary to get approval from this person, from my father. But that can happen. If we will withdraw into fears, seeking approval, feel like a failure, or that approval is only a temporary regardless to our performance. Now, or we'll grow greedy, bitter, commanding, controlling, or disillusioned. Now, as a pastor, what I've learned is to listen actively to people. If anything, I am a very good listener. And this is what I want to tell you. If you listen to somebody long enough, they will tell you what their unmet needs are, what's going on inside of them. And that's what my desire is to help to meet those unmet needs. So that, again, now this is how you would find out. This is how you find somebody's unmet needs. You find out what makes them angry, what makes them happy, what makes them sad. What is it that they're looking for in life? And sometimes it's in that conversation. People will share with you what's going on with them. I remember this young lady that went to she was a waitress, and there was a very important person that walked into the restaurant. And in the restaurant, this person was like a VIP, and he was surrounded by a bunch of different people. And this waitress was having a difficult time serving. She was rushing around and serving. And then what she did was she rushed out, and she had a piece of pie in her hand. And it was like some kind of cherry or fruit pie. And she tripped, and she spilled it all over the VIP. It was all over his shirt. The guy got up, he was trying to wipe it off. She was super embarrassed, red as an apple. The guy at that moment had a decision to make. He says, do I allow this person? But she's already embarrassed. She already feels badly. What he did was, he was an older gentleman. He said to her, he made a joke. He laughed about it. And then he stepped closer to her, and he got down a little bit, and he gave her a loving, fatherly kiss on the cheek. Everything diminished. Everything changed in that moment. Just the way that the person responded to the unmet need. He made a joke, she made a joke, and then she went about her day. You know what? That was a lesson to every person that was there about that not only the VIP's character, but also about the young lady. She kept her job, and that was just an example of how we can be a blessing to somebody every day. People let us know. There's hurt, there's pain all around us. If we would just listen to people, they would tell us what's going on inside of them so that we can help to bring affirmation to some of those unmet needs. Now, if we're gonna have good relationships, we also have to, and this is the next one, is deal with our own issues. Deal with our own issues. Sometimes we have fears or insecurities or hurts that kind of rise up. Some of the examples that I was sharing with you were things that were going on inside of a person that kind of put them already at a disadvantage. Well, we think we don't have these things, but I call them ungodly beliefs or misbeliefs. A misbelief is basically a wrong way of thinking. Here's an example of a misbelief. These are intertwined with our thoughts. There was a lady that had a misbelief. Actually, let's switch it. I'm picking on the ladies. Let's say it's a guy. A guy, he has a misbelief. He walks into a room, and there's 5 people that are laughing and joking over there. This actually happened. And he walked into the room, and he thought badly about himself. He heard the other people laughing, and he thought they were talking about him. So he reacted to them, and they reacted to him. That's the way rejection is. If we have bad thoughts that are going on because of things that have happened to us in our past, it doesn't make us bad people. It just means that we've been through some stuff. And sometimes we react based on those bad experiences of the past. That's called fear. So in this case, it was an occurrence where they ended up having restoration in their relationship, but what they were laughing and joking about had nothing to do with the guy. They were actually praising the person, but they were making a joke about something else. That's the way sometimes it is in our relationship. Now, we can take a look and an examination at all of those different things. I believe that there's something for all of us in unpacking boundaries. I want to ask that you would bow your heads.